sec. So this is a fun one. I mean, they're all fun, but. So let's just read the text straight through. Actually, let's read the text straight through, and then we'll talk about the people in it and what the text means. Tano Rabbanan, our sages taught, Ma'aseh beRabbi Eliezer, shegazar 13 ta'aniyot al hatzibur, velo yardu geshamim. So a ma'aseh, an occurrence, an incident involving Rabbi Eliezer, who decreed 13 fast days upon the community, and yet rain did not fall. So clearly there's a cause effect here in terms of why are they doing these 13 fasts? Because it's not raining. And in the land of Israel in particular, no rain, no food. Ba'acharona hitchilu hatzibur latzet. So at the end of the last fast, the community began to leave. And again, they fill in the blanks here, from synagogue. Amar lahem, he said to them, Tikantem kvarim la'atzmechem? Have you prepared graves for yourselves? Yeah, okay, this is a little bit harsh, and I'm not quite sure what he's responding to in terms of them, other than just that so far these prayers and fasting have not been effective. Ga'u kol ha'am bivchiya v'yardu geshamim. The people burst into tears, and the rain fell. So that's the first half of this story. Let's do the next half. Shuv ma'aseh beRabbi Eliezer. Another occurrence, another incident involving Rabbi Eliezer. Sheyarad lifnei hateva v'amar 24 berachot v'lo na'ana. So he literally descended before the ark as prayer leader and said 24 blessings. In other words, a very long form of the normal Shmona Esrei, the 18 brachot, of which, of course, there are 19 brachot in the 18 brachot, go figure. So this is a long form, 4 fast days, and he got no answer. Yarad Rabbi Akiva acharav. So Rabbi Akiva took his turn from the lectern. V'amar, Avinu Malkenu, ein lanu melech ela ata. Avinu Malkenu, lema'ancha rachem aleinu. Our Father, our King, we have no sovereign other than you. Our Father, our King, for your sake, have compassion on us. V'yardu geshamim. And the rain began to fall. Havu meranene Rabbanan. The rabbis began to murmur, talk amongst themselves. And this is not in the Steinsaltz, this is where having access to the original text makes a difference. These words are Aramaic. So this is not in the original text. This is the author, the mind of the Talmud, telling you what's going on. Yatzta bat kol v'amara. A divine heavenly voice came forth and said, Lo mipnei shezeh gadol mizeh, ela shezeh ma'avir al midotав, v'zeh eno ma'avir al midotав. So this voice said, not on account that this one is greater than that one, that Rabbi Akiva is greater than Rabbi Eliezer, that he gets answered, whereas Eliezer doesn't. But rather, it's that this one literally passes on his attributes. And here they correctly translated as he's forgiving. And this one is not forgiving. That's the entirety of the text we have for this evening. So I can stop share. and get to see all of you beautiful people. So, what do we do with this text? So, first off, we have to know something about these two towering figures of late first century rabbinic Judaism, namely Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, or Hyrcanus, and Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Eliezer is one of the most powerful characters in the Mishnah and in the Talmud. He's considered to be a disciple of Beit Shammai, even though he's a direct student of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, the guy who led the rabbinic class out of Jerusalem to Yavne, who himself was a student of Hillel the Elder. So even though he's in the chain of transmission through Hillel, temperamentally, he's a Shammite because he's very small c conservative in his method. And so methodologically, he agrees with Shammai. He's also temperamentally the same way. He's conservative. He can have, how shall we say, he can have his moments. And so he's called by Yochanan ben Zakkai the cemented cistern, that he remembers everything his teachers taught him. So in terms of the chain of transmission, he is one of the critical links in terms of getting the materials that now constitute the Mishnah, the Talmud, what we call Rabbinic Judaism, from the early pre-first century stratum to what we have now. The problem is his strength is his weakness, that he records everything his teachers taught and can't move beyond it. As it were, he's stuck. He's stuck in a good place, but he's stuck. So Rabbi Akiva is in fact Rabbi Eliezer's premier student. And yet temperamentally, ideologically, they couldn't be further apart. Akiva is, at least according to this narrative, forgiving, easygoing. He's also a radical in terms of how he approaches the Torah and its interpretation. That he's willing to go look literally and the crowns on the letters to find meaning where it's not obvious to anybody else that there's meaning hiding in plain sight. And so methodologically, they're different. So now let's go back to the story. The bat kol here is, to me, is the most interesting part of it. Whether they get answered in terms of rain falling because of fasting, because of prayer, the important things to me are twofold. First of all, that it's not the greatness of the person praying that matters to this narrative in the Talmud. It's the compassion that gets the prayer answered in both cases. And in terms of trying to live a Judaism that's values driven, where our halakha reflects our most deeply held values, that's a big deal. That's why the name Torah v'ahava is as appropriate as you can get in this context. And in terms of one of Chaim's list of things that we need to fix going forward, in terms of how at least people in this small community do Jewish, I'd just like to point out that a 24 bracha prayer doesn't get answered, but a 12-word prayer said the right way does get answered. Conclude from that what you will. I'm trying to think what else to bring to the place. Oh yeah, so getting back to it's the compassion that gets it. So this is not an assault on the Talmud at all. I teach it, I love it. But that for the rabbis, it's all about imitatio Deus, imitating God. And that takes many forms. It takes an intellectual form, it takes a spiritual form, and it takes a moral form. And so here, following in the lines of the prophets, who asked you to fast this way, right? That's what this narrative is hearkening back to. It's hearkening back to Prophet Micah. It's hearkening back to Isaiah. That the point isn't saying the words. The point isn't fasting. The point is changing who you are. And that then changes the outcome. Okay, that's all I've got. So open it up.
So thank you for the analysis. Did you see, I wrote a piece about this a couple of weeks ago. I mentioned this story.
I didn't.
You didn't see that?
It's in my inbox somewhere.
Okay. I like this story. The Musar movement, I forgot who raised this question, but one of the masters asked this question. The rabbi said that, I mean, according to the edition, right, they were gossiping, murmuring, what's going on here? He's better. And the heavenly voice said, no, he's not better, just this one is forgiving, and this one is unforgiving. Still, if the unforgiving one was not answered, and the forgiving one was answered, doesn't that mean that it's better to be forgiving and that this one is better than the other one? So
it's a different type of greatness.
Yes, but
not an intellectual greatness. It's a moral, ethical greatness.
Right. So we don't know when they said who's greater than whom, what was exactly the question. So sort of we shift the focus of the question. We replace the question with another one. It's as if when you ask a little kid ask about the rainbow, wow, it's amazing, right? And you take a prism and you say, no, you see the light breaks through the. You didn't explain the rainbow yet. You just showed that it could work somewhere else. So here we shift. This is the question anyway that the Musar people raise, and the answer is sort of like the imitato day that you mentioned, is that this is the midah keneged midah. God answers you in the way that you behave. So sometimes you have to be forgiving, sometimes you have to be unforgiving, maybe. But in this particular case, the people did not deserve rain because of their sins. And since Rabbi Akiva was forgiving and asked for forgiveness, God forgave him and granted the people rain.
Yep.
But from that I learned that we have to, when we ask for something, we have to first, and I think that's the power of tefillah that ties to what you said, we have to really reflect on how do we deal with others. Can we ask God for this or that? Are we willing to give this or that to others when they ask us to do it? Do we behave in the same manner? That's what I see in that story.
Yep.
And I brought it in context, in context of the, people were complaining, religious people, why are we separate like that? We can live as a community, we can pray together, we can congregate. And I asked, do we congregate usually, or we only congregate with those who are exactly like us? Do we erect divisions and partitions and separations and push people away? And if that is so, we can't complain that God does this to us, so we have to fix it.
So one of the great scholars of the previous generation, Rashal, Rabbi Saul Lieberman, said that there were people he could study with, but he couldn't pray with. And then there were people he could pray with, but he couldn't study with. So the goal is, in some sense, is to try to figure out how to make it so that these communities that can pray together can also study together. I was with my teacher, the Chabad Posek of Chicago, having a little bit to drink after shiur one evening. And he said, "No, Daniel, when are you going to join us?" As if. And I said, "I'm already with you. I'm here." The modern movements are the 12 tribes of Israel. And as long as the tribes are getting along, it's okay to be born into one tribe and study with people from another tribe and pray with people from a third tribe, marry somebody from the fourth tribe, go drinking with people from the fifth tribe. As long as the tribes are getting along, that's perfectly tenable. It's only when you insist that our tribe is the only tribe. Now I can't get along with somebody who's not in my tribe. So why should that be? And how do we figure out, I mean, religiously, politically, how do we do that? Without a bat kol. I mean, in some sense, the bat kol's already spoken and told us what to do and how to get out from under it. The challenge is, it's very easy to say, I don't want to deal with fill in the blank. They're terrible, fill in the blank. That's the easy path. The harder path is to say, yeah, I don't like this about them, but I like them. Or I don't like them, but I'm going to deal with them because that's what unity, that's what decency requires.
Can you show us the text one more time or read
Sure.
the part at the
Sure.
end? I'm
Sure.
interested in the bot call part.
Sure. Oh, wrong text. Hang on. That's my notes for, you're not supposed to see that I have notes here. I'm supposed to be able to do this extemporaneously. Sure, right. So here's the second half of the text. Is that what you were asking about, Shana?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So here's the text, Yatzda bat kol va'amara. So the bat kol came forth and proclaimed.
Okay, so could you go over one more time the meaning of what they said? The lo mifnei shezeh gadol mizeh.
Okay, so here's the bat kol saying, lo mipnei, not on account of, shezeh gadol mizeh, that this scholar is greater than the other one. So it's not on account that Rabbi Akiva is a greater scholar than Rabbi Eliezer. Ella, rather, shezeh ma'avir al midotав, that this one is compassionate. V'zeh eino ma'avir al midotав. And this one is not compassionate.
Ma'avir al midotав, you're translating compassionate. Can you break that down?
So ma'avir is the verb ayin bet resh, which means to pass over. In PL form.
Mm-hmm.
Or wait, is it hifil?
It's hifil.
It's a hifil. Wow. I'm still feeling a little weak from donating blood.
No, it's okay. There's a simple rule that my professor in Bar Ilan gave us called Uzi. Avar Zachar Yahid. Always say the verb in past tense, masculine singular. So he'avir.
Yeah, right.
Hifil. That's very easy.
Yep.
That's actually very.
Yeah. So it's nominally a causative. So to cause to pass over. Al is upon. Midotav is the word midah, which means measure. Plural. So midot, with the third person masculine singular possessive suffix. So his.
I think that I also struggle with the exact meaning of this phrase, Shana, and midot. We use today midot as the eretz, manners, civility, and all that. In the Mishnaic terminology, midot are literally that, measurements. They are the utensils that the vendors use to measure flour, oil, wine, and put into your utensils. And which was, by the way, the practice also in Yerushalayim in the Shuk in the 60s and 70s with some things. You wouldn't come, everything was prepackaged. You had big bags and big, or like the grazing area in Whole Foods. So I think that when they say ma'avir al midotav, the idea is when you look at the measurements, when you come and buy a gallon of wine and they give you the exact gallon, they make sure that you don't get a drop over it. And the ma'avir al midotav is someone who's overflowing, will give you more. Will not insist that it has to be exactly that. It's like lifnim mishurat adin, but in a more as a metaphor from the world of commerce. I think that's what it is.
Yep.
That's helpful. I was thinking that because of the discussion last week, I was reading through the Oven of Achnai Talmud because it's supposedly so popular, and I had never really read it. So, from my understanding here, that connecting to our other class, the Midrash Halacha, that Rabbi Eliezer was the one who wanted to hold on to tradition and didn't accept anything that was not passed down from his teacher. That phrase about he never spoke any word except what his teacher had said. But Rabbi Akiva was willing to look at different aspects. Could that be involved here, or am I way off base connecting the two?
I don't think you're off base. I don't think it directly connects here, but what it does connect is that the personalities of the protagonists in this narrative, their personalities are reflected in these stories in a similar way as they are in the Oven of Achnai incident. And so in that sense, they personify the schools, because Shammai is the one who said, we have this way of doing things. If it's forgotten, it's forgotten. There's really no way to bring it back. It's a very small c conservative approach to the interpretation of the Torah, which is the exact opposite of Hillel. Hillel takes a much broader, more expansive, more creative way of looking at halakha, which is, by the way, why you get the case where, so Hillel wants there to be a single halakha. It almost doesn't matter what it is, as long as everybody does it. So there are points where Shammai proves their point and Hillel doesn't have a good answer. And so they accept Shammai's opinion. Okay, we don't generally agree with you, but on this thing, we agree with you. You're right. We'll change our opinion to conform to yours because your opinion makes sense. And we have to do one thing, so let's do the one thing your way. Shammai never does that. Shammai, it's my way or no way. It's a very different approach. And so we see that reflected. We don't see that reflected here directly, but certainly in the Oven of Achnai narrative, you see it reflected profoundly. That Eliezer gives them every proof under the sun. And it's not that they're saying your proofs are wrong. They're saying, yeah, okay, you have it from your teachers. We accept that. We just don't accept the halacha as your way. Vered Noam, it's in the Wikipedia article on Rabbi Eliezer, talks about how what's happening in that sugya, what's happening at Yavne, is a transformation of how halacha gets done. It's not just the received tradition. In fact, I've got this going all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu. So what? All you've proven is that you have a Masorah going back to Moshe Rabbeinu. We're changing we're changing not just the practical halacha, we're changing how halacha gets decided. And he is unwilling or unable to accept that proposition, which is why he ends up being excommunicated, because he can't go along with that program. Haim, please.
Yeah, Shana got me thinking. Maybe look, the previous story with Rabbi Eliezer. The first story is Rabbi Eliezer, right?
Yeah.
And what happens there? So Rabbi Eliezer decreed a complete cycle of 13 fasts, and with all the prayers. So in each one of those fast days, they pray the 24 brachot in the main plaza all together, right? And it doesn't work. Lo yardu gshamim. Eventually, the people are leaving, and he says, "Are your graves ready?" Meaning you're going to die if you don't keep praying. And they start to cry. And then it rains. So, and then I'm saying that, Shana, you treated me
causes the rain.
Yeah. So here's, I think actually Shana is right, in terms of Eliezer being a stickler to tradition. For him, you have to go through the whole cycle, right? It seems like when this is Baharona, they didn't complete the cycle. They left before the end. They gave up. And he says, "Are you ready to die?"
Oh, interesting.
So are you ready to die? Meaning, you can't give up before we completed the cycle. It must work because that's the system. But what he did when he said these words, after 13 Ta'aniyot, it's the first time that he communicated with them. And instead of them going through the motions, they are now praying. And now it's raining. So he was able to bring the rain when he deviated unintentionally from the program. He goes by the program, but the one comment that he makes extemporaneously, because he's upset, gets them, he moves them and they cry. And in the second story, he goes to the 24 brachot, and it doesn't work. He follows the system. That's how we do it. Rabbi Akiva looks at the crowd and says, they're not in the mindset of the 24 brachot. They have to be stirred. They have to be moved. Avinu Malkanu. When he says that, the people joined in. So it's about who is able to connect with the people, and so that connects also to the adherence to your tradition. This is how we do it. We never change. It reminded me of an incident I had when I was a rabbi in Los Angeles, and the first or second year, whatever, I had a lot of people who did not connect to tefillah. It's people, the Sephardic tefillah of Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, very long tefillah. How do you get people connected? The text is not so familiar. So in one of my drashot, I used the song that I said many people don't think of it as a religious song, but I think it's a very religious song, written by Yoko Ono. And I said, she said, now we know that it's her, right? And I said, she says that if you fulfill the mitzvot because you think of heaven and hell, this is not good, right? What if we all live in peace and harmony for the sake of being good? That's really the gist of Imagine. But as I was just reading the song, and all of a sudden, the younger crowd started chanting it, and I joined them. And it was very inspiring because that was a text that they connected to. But then, I'm not saying no comparison here, but then one of the elders came to me. It was an Iraqi Jew born in India, and he comes to me and says, "Don't bring the Beatles into the synagogue." And I said, "No worries, it's not the Beatles, it's just John Lennon." But I think that's something that happens here, is the ability to connect to the people in tefillah. And in the first story, Rabbi Eliezer does it inadvertently. In the second story, it's Rabbi Akiva who does it.
I think it might be more connected with the people, but the ability to elicit emotion from them. Because here, they were just fasting. I mean, think of all the people on Yom Kippur sitting in synagogue with you, and how many are really focusing on that intention, and how many are just like looking at their watch to see when they can eat and drink again. And then the second story, it also has emotion in it. And that reminds me of like a lot of the Hasidic stories, where they'll have people coming up and doing all this stuff, and then you'll have some person who's uneducated, the story about the one who stands up and recites the Aleph Bet, and then these wonderful things happen, and the Rebbe says that's because, it was his intention. So I think there might be emotion, like eliciting emotion, which is what a leader should be able to do as well, is to make us feel our own connection to the divine.
In both cases, it's Akiva in the first case, it's Eliezer who shakes them up, who tries to rouse them. Are you ready to die? Now, it's a nasty thing to say, but it works. And again, he's in character. One of my teachers actually thought that Rabbi Eliezer was a literary. If he didn't exist, the rabbis would have to invent him. But that's another story.
I know dozens like him. I'll tell you later.
Her theory was also that he suffered from Asperger's syndrome, which is entirely possible. Given how he looks at the world, that's entirely possible. But also notice the prayer of Rabbi Akiva is short and to the point. It's a 2-line Avinu Malkeinu, 12 words. You go on Yom Kippur and you read the version of Avinu Malkeinu that we read today, and you're going, they made a litany out of it. They took a short, beautiful prayer. I won't say they killed it, but you get to the point where you add so much to it that you lose the original strength of it. By the way, in terms of bringing the Beatles into liturgy, the Christians have the same issue with U2. In fact, there's a version of Christian worship involving U2 music. It's called U2charist. We're not there yet, but you know.
Yes. I think that was that year I produced a reader for the high holidays, and I tried to avoid religious texts. I looked for a lot of poems that did not have the word God in it, because I saw a lot of readers produced by Orthodox conservative synagogues that, you know, even when they were diverse, it was a lot of God and religion and theology, and I wanted to show that you could go there without the you could get to the spirituality with, you know, harping on other strings. But I wanted, you know, when what you said about Rabbi Eliezer, and maybe we could go back to seeing everyone, Daniel.
Oh sure, sure.
So I wanted to, you know, what you said about Asperger's syndrome. I think a lot of rabbis, a lot of great scholars, not only rabbis in general, you know, religious leaders have one, you know, they're on the spectrum. I think Maimonides was also there, and I mean the others suffer from OCD, which is a different story, for sure. You know, the obsessive need to count and chant and read and cleanse and all these things are definitely, you know, part of that. But you know, the person that I thought of when you said that, you know, it's like a nasty remark, but it gets it done. My son told me that one year in yeshiva, they were dancing on Simchat Torah, and it was, and I know from my experience, you know, there's this innocence of the young boys are study, and they're really, really excited, and they dance with such enthusiasm. And the Rosh Yeshiva was standing next to the Mashgiach, who's the Mashgiach is the spiritual guide, right, of the yeshiva. And the Rosh Yeshiva tells the Mashgiach, look how they dance with such enthusiasm. And the Mashgiach says, nah, they're just thinking of the cheesecake and coffee. Like, he was like, or maybe it was the other way. Maybe the Mashgiach said how enthusiastic they were, and I hope it was the other way around, actually. But it's, you know, it reminds you also of the story of Rabbi Eliezer when he says those who leave his class, those are with the barrels, with the, right? It looks at them the very, not giving them credit of being able to be spiritual in whatever they do. So here also, you know, the road to spirituality goes through the motions, through the mechanical work of how the rabbis set it up.
There's a story told of Rav Soloveitchik. Actually, Chaim, I need you to mute. Thank you. That most of the time he spent Sukkot at home in Boston, but apparently one Shmini Atzeret Simchat Torah he was at YU, and so they were doing hakafot, dancing, and he was at his shtender, his face in the Gemara. And somebody came over to him and said, will the Rav be dancing? And he looked up and he said, the Rav is dancing. Now you can go, Nebuch, what a litvak. Okay, that's right. Okay. But you can also see that for the Rav, it wasn't just intellectualism. There was a joy that came from that. And that joy, okay, whatever. I don't know how old he was when this story happened. He wasn't going to dance, but he could still dance. We see this kind of notion. Ketzad merakdin lifnei hakala. Famous Gemara leads to the famous dance done at every Jewish wedding, right? People think it's how does one dance before the bride? Except the verb to dance is lirkod, a pa'al verb, whereas the story has merakdin. It's a PL, so it's an intensive form of dancing. And in fact, it's what words do you say to the bride? Because those words can make a woman feel or can make her dance inside.
I had a quick question.
Please.
Have you ever seen the show The Office?
I haven't.
So there's
You'll have to take this question.
There's an episode where the supervisor, he's throwing this office party and he's trying to make everybody stop working, get rid of work, come and dance. And so he brings them all to this office to dance. But this one woman, she's more like a little bit like the show's trying to describe her as like the more prudish type. So she's not really into dancing like that. So she starts cleaning up the office. And the supervisor says, no more dancing, no more no cleaning, you have to dance. And she says, aren't you going to let me have a little bit of fun? It's like she wants to clean, so it's like this is her fun. And so my question is but like how difficult must it be to create an environment where everybody feels a part of not uniformity but unity, but at the same time recognizing all the individual needs? So it's like the tefillah brings everybody together, but sometimes people might not feel like saying the prayers. Like how difficult that must be. That's
the question you just hit on, Nathaniel, is a tough question. How do you make it so that it works for the majority and yet still includes the minority? What do you do when tefillah just isn't working for you? What do you do when services are? There was one time I showed up an hour late to shul, and the Rav of the Minyan pulled me over and said, would you show up an hour late for a movie? And I said, if it was long and boring. He was like, ow. I said, you asked. Okay, so how do we make it so that Jewish prayer isn't long and boring? And that's not to take away from Rosh Hashanah liturgy, Yom Kippur liturgy. It's beautiful. Some of the poetry in it is magnificent. So what do you do for the other 90% of the Jewish world where it just doesn't work? How do you balance that? How do you bridge that gap? And so, Haim, your answer of bring poetry and ostensibly non-religious poetry that in fact is religious poetry.
And also keep the nice parts of the tefillah.
Yeah, sure.
This year we sort of had a mandate to do it because we had to do a short tefillah. So for the first year, I was able to tell you, this is how we do it, because I'm not going to linger in the prayer area, which was outside, for more than the max was 2 hours and 15 minutes, and that's what we did. Yeah, so Yom Kippur, the Shaharit prayers and the Musaf with Seder Avodah and everything took 2 hours and 15 minutes, which were usually that's 1/3 or 1/4 of what it takes. Yet most people walked out happy because I kept the significant parts and the parts that everybody sings together. I cut all the repetitions, a lot of the negativity, and I rewrote Seder Avodah to contain just the important parts. So you leave enough of what people connect to traditionally, and the outcome was amazing. Because if I would have told them beforehand, listen guys, we're going to have a tefillah for 2.5 hours. No, you're crazy. We want to stay here. And they did, even with COVID, they said, we want to stay here all day. I said, I sent a message that if anyone wants to stay after tefillah, not in the common area, but go to someone's house and sit in the backyard and go with, you're welcome. But that's what we're going to do. And it was amazing. People had 5-6 hours to rest in between. They came to Ne'ilah energized, and it was unbelievable. The Ne'ilah with 70 people compared to 150 usually, of course spread out. So that inspired me to, I keep working on the Siddur, on trimming and creating an individual Nusa. And I think people should be able to do that, get the tefillah has to move you, and if it doesn't, just stick with the Rambam. Even if you believe that it's a mitzvah midoraita, the mitzvah is to pray once a day. So if one time a day you said, please God, right, which we all do today, I think, right, you're good. You said your tefillah.
You look at the very opening of Rambam's Hilchot Tefillah. It says there are three core things you have to have. You have to have recognition that there's God, you have to ask for things, and you have to show gratitude. So if literally you go, yo, God, you're awesome. Give me everything I need. Thank you so much. You have just fulfilled your obligation to Jewish prayer. The first time I taught a class in Jewish prayer, I said something that people thought I was being facetious about when I said that Jewish prayer is a subset of prayer. They thought I was joking. I'm like, no, actually, that's, if you're not praying, you could be saying Hickory Dickory Dock, the traditional version, or the Andrew Dice Clay version, and they're equally prayerful or not prayerful. So what are you doing? So doing, we actually did Rosh Hashanah services outdoors. Shacharit, Torah reading, Haftarah, Musaf, Shofar, 90 minutes. Take no prisoners. So that minhag, I hope, will survive COVID.
Me too. I went last year, and I honestly, I feel bad for saying it, but I told myself, like, I don't know if I can do this every year going in and out like this long, because I mean, ever since I started going to shul, I just always missed the high holy day. So last year was actually my first year going to the whole 5.5 hours of Rosh Hashanah, and I just told myself, I don't know if I can do this every year. I got sick actually.
Nebuch.
Yeah, it was a long day.
And what's the value added? That's how I look at it. Is there's a cost to doing long form prayer, and if there's a value that brings to it, that's great. And if it doesn't, what's the point? And it may be that our ancestors, physical and spiritual, were able to focus their prayers in a way that we aren't able. But the reality is that, in fact, we're not able to. And by the way, lest you think that our ancestors were able to, there's a beautiful Tosfot that says the following rule. So the rule is, for standing prayer, for Amidah, that you have to have minimal kavanah. And if you don't have minimal kavanah, you have zero, you have to do it over again. Because there's an obligation to pray, and you haven't done it. You've said the words Baruch Atah, right, all the way through, but you haven't prayed in any meaningful and therefore halachic sense. That's the rule of the Mishnah. That's the rule of the Talmud. Comes Tosfot and says, don't do that. For two reasons. A, our kavanah isn't very good to begin with. This is the Tosafists writing this. These are guys for whom Talmud was bread and butter. And they're saying our kavanah isn't so good. And second of all, we're being recorded, so I'll be polite. You messed up the first time. What gives you any idea that you're going to do any better the second time? And I'm looking at this Tosa, I'm going, these guys are real. They're speaking my reality. And so, yeah. So that's why it's data mine the tradition for how to come up with a better answer, because we have to be innovative, but a lot of those answers for how to make Jewish prayer better are already built into the system. All we have to do is find them.
The Tosafists were realistic. They were also the guys who used to eat cheese made by non-Jews without supervision, right?
They did what?
Anyway, I just shared in the chat the name of a book called Help, Thanks, Wow. Those are the three elements of tefillah. Help, please God help me. Thanks, wow. Written by Anne Lamott. She's an amazing author. She has other very beautiful books. It's a short book, of course, from a Christian point of view, but very, very powerful because she speaks her heart. She's very honest, and I think it's worthwhile. It's a good book to read, to get that aspect of tefillah that really comes from the heart.
When Abraham Joshua Heschel speaks of radical amazement, that's what that's hearkening to, is to let yourself in that moment just be wowed. Yeah. Okay,
so I have another class coming up soon, and we're going to meet for Arvit at 7:45. I want to thank again Rabbi Daniel for amazing shiur. Next week we might have a little Q&A going back and forth with so like he said, bring your questions, your ideas, and we'll have an open. Hi Lorenzo, how good to see everyone. Hi Lorenzo. And okay, thank you for opening the your hearts and minds to hear Divrei Torah.
There you go. All right, we'll see you guys next week, please God.
תודה רבה, להתראות. Thank you so much. Bye.